Okay, as folks are coming into the webinar, I'd like to welcome you. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dexter Voisin, and I have the honor of serving as Dean at the Mandel School here at Case Western Reserve University. And I'm so pleased today to welcome you to today's Impact Talk. This is the first of three talks celebrating March, as you know, is Social Work Month. And these are presentations celebrating social workers and more specifically our amazing alumni. Now, many of you know when we talk about the Mandel School, we often speak in terms of decades, impact, and legacy. And today we have the rare privilege of seeing and listening to one of our living legacies personified. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Norman Sohn, who graduated from our master's program in 1968 and is one of our distinguished alumni recipients, having been honored during our school's centennial celebration in 2016. Now, last year I had the opportunity to meet Norman and his beautiful wife, Marsha, and I was just blown away. We sat down over dinner and we were talking about clinical practice. He's a master clinician, and he reminded me why I love social work and so much, in particular, clinical social work. Now, Norman's journey began with us over 57 years ago, a span of time that has seen the social work profession undergo tremendous shifts. Throughout his career, Norman hasn't just navigated these changes, he's mastered the art of professional evolution. And when you hear him today, you will see why we refer to him as a master clinician. From his foundational days here at the Mandel School to his varied roles, he has remained anchored by the very values we teach our students today. Now, on a spotlight, you'll see a Case Western University fundraising postcard mailed about 20 years ago. It's very ironic because we are gearing up for our annual Day of Giving on March 14. Now, Norman, I'm told that this is a picture of you and classmate Lenny Melnick as students performing a skit spoofing their professors. And Norman is at the typewriter. And as you know, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. Norm, as you know, has a great sense of humor. So I invite you all to listen intently today as Dr. Sohn is truly providing us with a masterclass in professional resilience. He'll be helping us analyze how the values we learn at the Mandel School serve as a compass through 57 years of a changing landscape in social work. Norm, I'd like to thank you for returning virtually to our academic home to share your perspective on what it truly means to live a life of purpose in social work. Norman, the screen is all yours.
Thank you, Dean. First of all, I'd like to thank you for allowing me the privilege of presenting. MSAS has changed my life, and I am very, very grateful. In 2019, 51 years after I graduated MSAS, I established a scholarship for those in need. How did I get here and what has happened since is the subject of my part one of my presentation. In the second section, I will present my most recent paper on treatment. As an undergrad at the University of Connecticut, I majored in political science with no idea of what I wanted to do with it. Politics was the subject of many family conversations, and I enjoyed participating, as I do today. I had lots of anxiety in college and found it difficult to sit down to study. Any excuse to avoid it was welcome. I pulled all-nighters studying for tests or writing papers. Not surprisingly, my grades reflected it. Around graduating, I traveled around the country and thought San Francisco would be a great place to live. Upon my return home, I had no job nor idea what to do. I became a substitute teacher in my old high school and thought of getting a master's in teaching, but it didn't feel it was the right fit. I took the LSATs, but I really did not want to be a lawyer. My mother, who at the time was an administrative assistant in our local welfare office, told me they were looking for caseworkers. I had no idea what that meant, but I was desperate for a job. I took the test and scored well and was offered a job. Probably because of my substitute teaching, they placed me in child welfare. My job was working with kids in foster homes and institutions, and I found the work rewarding. Within a short time, I began volunteering in an adult post psychiatric day center whose director was the husband of one of my colleagues. My interaction included playing ping pong with some of them. Being very competitive, I decided to play left handed so as not to upset my opponents, as winning was not the goal here. More on ping pong later. I began to think about grad school and took some evening grad courses in psychology at the University of Hartford to confirm that I actually had the ability to do the work in view of my past record. That proved successful. I then entered therapy to deal with my anxiety. Feeling emboldened, I applied to several schools of social work, all no closer than 500 miles from home. As the middle child, I adapted to the role of people pleaser to get attention, as my older brother was the favorite. My mother turned to me for help with my father, siblings, and my grandmother. I knew I had to leave home in order to find out who I was. I received rejections from every school except SAS, as was known then. One school even sent back my application check. One moment. Um, okay. Clearly, I'm sorry. Clearly, my low GPA disqualified me. The path to SAS was not yet open. They asked me to take the Miller analogy exams. The idea terrified me, as I rarely did well on such tests. However, I scored well enough, for soon after I received a request for an in-person interview. Being anxious about going to Cleveland, I asked for a local interview, thinking that they would set me up with a SAS alum. Instead, they set me up with the chairman of the group work department, Norman Goroff, at the UConn School of Social Work. His name came up a few years later, which we'll see. One of his questions was why I hadn't applied to UConn. By this time, I had learned that SAS was one of the top 5 schools of social work. My reply came from a place of self-confidence I didn't know I had. I said that SAS, being one of the top schools, could afford to take a risk because of my low GPA, because they didn't have to prove their status, whereas UConn, being lower ranked, sought to improve their standing by only taking students with higher GPAs. He asked what I would do if I was not accepted. I said I'd reapply because I know I'd be successful. His response was that I should apply to UConn next year, as I just had my interview. Subsequently, I received a letter placing me on the SAS waiting list, followed by another week asking if I was still interested, and finally a letter of acceptance. Years later, living in San Francisco, my cousin visited with her best friend, Debbie Goroff, whose father, I learned, was the man who interviewed me. I treated her well. I arrived at SAS knowing no one. That quickly changed. I threw myself into full gear, believing that this was my only chance at having a successful career. I went to the library every weekday night and read everything on each syllabus. Fortunately, there was a professional ping pong table in the student faculty lounge. Taking a break from library studying, I met many classmates playing there, as well as during breaks between classes. It was also a time to interact with some professors and even Dean Herman Stein, who was also a very good player. I played right-handed to meet the challenge. I was so anxious about failing that I handed in my first paper 1 month before it was due. And you can imagine in a small school, that word got around quickly, like, who is this guy? So this time my grades reflected my efforts. I had taken out a student loan to pay tuition. At the end of my first semester, I received notice from SAS that I was given an NIMH scholarship paying full tuition plus living expenses. What a turnaround. I immediately paid off my student loan. I became active in the student group involved in political action. As co-editor of the SAS Review, I wrote articles supportive of welfare and civil rights. When Martin Luther King came to Cleveland, I joined classmates attending his talk. A Black woman singer whose name was not familiar to me opened the program. Her name was Aretha Franklin. Later, one of Dr. King's closest advisors, Bayard Rustin, came to SAS and met with a group of us. In addition, we met with leaders of CORE and others in the vanguard of social change. Playing ping pong, I met Ray Koleski, professor in the community organization sequence. We had something else in common. He had firsthand knowledge about the politics in my hometown, and he was impressed with the depth of my understanding about local politics. He invited me to join his class on interorganizational relations. I chose to do an analysis of Mayor Stokes' summer student intern program, which I presented to the class. It was met with applause, much to my surprise. Before graduation, I received job offers from the local Jewish Community Federation to become an associate director of social planning. I declined that offer, as well as later when working as a caseworker in San Francisco at Jewish Family and Children's Services, I was offered a similar position at the Federation here, and later at the Seattle Federation. In the years following, I was offered to become the executive director of several small Jewish family services. My desire, however, was to be a therapist. I became active in the local NASW chapter, serving on the Social Action and Disarmament Committee, and then treasurer on the board. I also joined the California Society for Clinical Social Work, where I presented several clinical papers. Nearby was the San Francisco Psychoanalytic Institute, where I took several extension courses. In addition, I was asked to teach in the School of Social Welfare Extension program at the University of California, Berkeley. Not content with my skills, I did a postmaster's fellowship in the Department of Psychiatry at Mount Zion Hospital and Medical Center. Here I was assigned to share an office with Professor Erik Erikson, a leading figure in the psychoanalytic community. I had not only read his epic book, Childhood and Society, while at SAS, but I used it to teach. He taught a seminar where he encouraged trainees to think creatively. As an aside, he was quite elderly, and he was out ill for a time. I sent him a card which read, quote, "Get well soon. A bowl of chicken soup has been consumed in your honor." Unquote. He said it was the best get well card he'd ever received. He was a great role model, humble and at ease with himself. Soon I became the director of adult services, as well as directing the training program for graduate students in social work and psychology at Jewish Family Services. In selecting those seeking internships, I did not ask their grades, nor give much weight to their descriptions of a case. I'd internalized my experience getting accepted to MSAS. The single most important criteria was, what did they learn about themselves working with the patient? While working full-time, I also started a private practice. A couple of years later, I entered the PhD program at the Sandville Institute for Clinical Social Work and Psychotherapy. My doctoral thesis was based on the time-limited groups I ran for children of Holocaust survivors at Jewish Family Service. After graduating Sandville, I continued as a consulting clinical supervisor. At Mount Zion, I had taken a seminar led by Joseph Weiss. I applied his ideas known as control mastery theory in my thesis, as it transformed how I worked. No longer did I take on the role of a therapist, I became one. I went on to join what is now the San Francisco Psychotherapy Research Group, attending Weiss's research seminar for many years, where I participated in over 20 clinical research projects. I also supervised graduate students in its clinic. I continued consulting with Weiss weekly. When his health declined, Weiss asked me and a colleague to take over his seminar, which we did for the next 15 years. During this time, I had also become a volunteer assistant clinical professor at Langley Porter Psychiatric Institute at the University of California, San Francisco, where I supervised psychiatric residents. Having a half-time practice and a full-time job, I retired from Jewish Family Service and go into full-time private practice. I joined the American Association for Psychoanalysis and Clinical Social Work, where I often presented clinical papers to the local chapter. More recently, I have presented clinical papers in their past 4 national conferences. I have no specific plans to retire, although I am at a point in my career where I have to accept I will not be able to practice forever. Some denial is obviously at work here. I enjoy teaching and consultation to other therapists. I am at the top of my skills and I don't want to give that up. I will share some humorous stories from my practice. A 9-year-old boy came into my office, threw open the window, and yelled out, "He's trying to kill me," and then laughed. Then, about 10 years later, the receptionist said I had a visitor. He reminded me who he was and said, "I just wanted to let you know that I turned out okay." Once I was in the men's room stall when a patient entered. When I later took the patient to my office, he said he had recognized me in the men's room by my shoes. Without missing a beat, I asked how it felt catching his therapist with his pants down. I mean, what else could I do? He laughed uncontrollably. About 2 years ago, he called to inform me that he and his wife had moved into the Jewish retirement home adjacent to the former Jewish family offices, which had now been incorporated into the new high rise. His apartment was in the old JF and CS building. 50 years prior, I had seen him and his 3 children briefly after the death of his wife. When his son came in to visit, he asked his father, "Dad, didn't you recognize that you're living in Norman's old office?" I have never forgotten the importance of my experience at SAS. Each year I made a donation culminating in establishing a scholarship. Last month I had the pleasure of meeting this year's recipient over Zoom. Whenever a MSAS representative comes to town, I am always glad to meet them. Many years ago, Dean Cleve Gilmore invited me and other alums for cocktails. He asked if we had some suggestions for the school. I noted that there were many talented alums who had much expertise to share with the students, so why not establish a distinguished alumni lecture series? On his visit the following year, he asked if I were serious about my offer to come to Cleveland. Of course, I replied. On one of my trips east to see my mother in Hartford, I could just drop there at no cost to MSAS. I gave a lecture on my work there the following year. Last December, while in Mexico, I met a woman from Cleveland. When she heard I attended MSAS, she reported that former Dean Gilmore was her neighbor. I asked her to give him my regards. In 2016, I received a letter announcing that I was, on the 100th anniversary of MSAS, I was selected to be one of the 100 distinguished alumni. I was speechless. Most recently, I've enjoyed meeting with Dean Voisin and exchanging ideas. I look forward to his future visits and my support of MSAS.
So, no,
Dean,
before you go into the second part, I just
yes,
want to invite folks in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Start putting in your questions, and we're going to have a Q&A at the end of this. So, Norm, I were already blown away. I mean, meeting Eric Erickson, how incredible. Dr. King, Aretha Franklin, Beard Rustin. I mean, I'm listening and holding on to your story. This is quite incredible. So I'm just going to invite folks to put your questions in the Q&A box, and Norm is going to transition now to talking a little bit about his clinical frameworks and providing some client examples.
thanks, Dean. So this is a paper that I originally presented last November at the National Conference of the uh, American Association for Psychoanalysis and Clinical Social Work in Austin. It's called The Patient's Plan for Therapy, an Individualized Case-Specific Approach to Treatment. For the first 5 years after social work school, I conducted therapy in accordance with traditional psychoanalytic principles. In my postmaster's fellowship, I took a seminar with Joe Weiss, which changed how I practiced for the next 52 years. Weiss concluded after studying his own cases that it was essential for the patient to feel safe. Supported by the research of the San Francisco Psychotherapy Research Group, SFPRG, he developed concepts as to how a patient tests for safety. This plan may be partly conscious. It allows the therapist to anticipate how the patient may work in therapy to gain control and mastery over their traumas, thus the name Control Mastery Theory, CMT. It is not a technique. It is a cognitive, interpersonal, psychoanalytic theory as to how the mind works. It is based partly in Freud's later work, in which he expressed the view that a person may unconsciously anticipate danger. Weiss concluded that a patient may also be able to unconsciously anticipate and plan for safety. Accordingly, the patient's safety is what allows the patients to gain access to previously warded off mental contents and gain insight into their maladaptive behavior. It is the therapist's task to infer how patients may test for safety using the iterative process to achieve their goals. It is a continuation of the process children use to gain the attention needed from their caretakers. The iterative process is a term I developed several years ago to explain how patients work to master their conflicts, as they had often asked why they were talking about the same issue over and over. I would tell them that it takes many iterations before conflicts can be resolved. It is a continuation of the process children use to gain the attention needed from their caretakers. The infant will employ a variety of behaviors, each time learning which work and which don't. Likewise, caretakers learn from trial and error which each behavior means. The iterative process in therapy is the patient's way of informing the therapist of need in much the way that infants crying is aimed at cueing the caretaker of distress and the need for a response. The good enough caretaker will keep responding in different ways until the infant is soothed via a series of iterative attempts at amelioration that will engender the infant's confidence in the caretaker. Necessary adaptations. As we know from Bowlby, Stern, and others, that a child's essential need is to maintain the tie to its caregivers. As Winnicott noted, the child will adapt to whatever behavior is necessary to maintain that tie. Now, I want to stop here and tell you I had a patient early on in my career uh, who was a very talented but very disturbed young man. He was actually living in his car. And one day he came into the office and he handed me a, a cube, and on it was a um, handle. On each facet was a handle. And its phrase was, he said, "My needs drive me like a freight train toward the handles of your face." When I presented this case at one of the extension courses at the Psychoanalytic Institute, uh, uh, the patient would agree with everything I was saying. And the consultant came in and said, "Well, of course he did. He had to, because he was holding on for dear life." So um, these adaptations can result in abdicating an authentic sense of self and adopting what I have termed an expected self. I prefer this to Winnicott's false self, for it describes it as a necessary result in order to feel safe with others, and it avoids the stigma implied in doing something wrong. Many patients receive immense relief from blame when I interpret that they had no choice but to make these necessary adaptations. Moreover, they would be subjected to overwhelming fear and anxiety were they to experience the reality that they were all alone without the protections necessary for survival. Patients may gain from interpretations, but it is not until they feel safe to abandon their protective adaptations that they can allow themselves to experience the depth of the emotional traumas necessary for mastery. That mastery constitutes what one of my patients called, quote, emotional discovery, which allows for what he called emotional freedom. That is, to be one's authentic self as a result of these corrective emotional experiences. He lamented that although he had an intellectual understanding of how his beliefs interfered in actualizing his goals, it had not freedom to feel safe abandoning those adaptations. Now, central to Weiss's theory is the plan formulation method. It includes a description of the traumas the patient experienced, the pathogenics that the beliefs that the patient developed as a result of the traumas, the patient's goals for therapy, how the patient is likely to test the therapist, and the insights that would be helpful for the patient to obtain. I have participated in over 20 SFPRG research projects in which I applied this method. I use it as a framework to inform me as to what is transpiring in each therapy. I try to maintain an open mind rather than being concerned fitting my patients into a particular model. This allows for the spontaneity essential in my work. Control mastery theory not only allows me to be myself, but the only way I can be helpful is by being myself versus playing the role of a therapist. So I never make the formulation about my patients because first I trust what's happening between me and my patient and rely on the on the method just to inform me as to give me a framework. Now, patients enter therapy highly motivated to overcome their problems and will engage in this iterative process in which they present activities designed to test out their debilitating irrational beliefs. The patient's use of the iterative process informs the therapist of whether distress has been alleviated. I wish to emphasize that repeated iterations on the same issue often continue throughout treatment. Without a framework for understanding the necessity for this iterative process, a therapist may blame the patient as being resistant. I've never blamed the patient for being resistant. I don't believe in that concept. The therapist may also feel to blame for what appears to be a lack of progress. Just as the infant initiates the iterative process, so too does the patient unconsciously do so to elicit critical information regarding their pathogenic beliefs. They have a drive to do so because they want to be relieved of distress concerning important aspects of their lives. Thus, it is not a method therapists originate, but one they participate in so they can understand their patient's need. CMT's case-specific approach in formulating the patient's plan allows the therapist to understand each patient's unique manner for communicating needs and successfully track progress by calibrating the effects of each intervention. CMT allows maximum flexibility as opposed to some other theories which dictate the therapist follows certain rules. CMT's rule is to follow the patient in a case-specific approach. SFPRG research has demonstrated that when tests are passed, the patient becomes slightly but measurably less anxious, experiences feelings more vividly, becomes bolder and more insightful, and moves towards actualizing thwarted goals. For example, a patient told me yesterday she feels much taller. She used to, and this was an interesting observation that she was coaching me to say, look, I'm making progress. A failed test will engender a regression or a stalemate until subsequent tests are passed. The CMT plan formulation method allows the therapist to more accurately assess progress and to redirect the therapist's attention when off track. Thus, a past test is not necessarily the end of a process, but represents one stage of an iterative process in mastering a conflict. Neuroscience concurs in the necessity for continuing work for working through until the end of treatment, since, quote, the predictive brain requires the repetition of new experiences in order to change. I want to say a few words about patient coaching. The process of patient coaching the therapist is not a new concept. 40 years ago, Patrick Casement, a British social worker, in his highly informative book, Learning from the Patient, argued that patients communicate important clues to therapists, often unconsciously, about their problems, their experience of the therapist, and ways in which they may be helped. One of the implications of coaching is that the therapist's ability to recognize, understand, and attend to such communications may be critical in determining overall responsiveness and the ultimate effectiveness of treatment. Failure to recognize and respond to such coaching, however, could potentially derail the therapist from the patient's plan. From the perspective of CMT, a patient who senses the therapist's incompatibility with their plan might coach the therapist to get back on track, providing an opportunity for the therapist's restored responsiveness. In this way, coaching may represent the patient's effort to avoid treatment failure. Should the therapist continue to neglect such coaching, however, the risk for premature termination would likely increase. So, upon ending the first session, a patient asked, "What should I call you? Norm, Norman, Dr. Sohn?" And I replied, well, whatever is comfortable for you. He then said, well, how about if I call you King? I said, well, that would be okay, but we're going to have to talk about it. Now, later in treatment, he revealed that his father, a prominent scientist, demanded that the family treat him like a king. He wanted
Mhm.
to know if I needed to be treated like a king, obviously. Some other examples. A patient asked at the start of a session for me not to talk that day, coaching me to resist making interventions to allow him to work it more independently. Another stated that he'd need to complain for as long as he needed, letting me know I should not be impatient or blame him for this repetition. And one said, after I made a comment, well, let me put it another way. Like, hey, dummy, you didn't get it this time, let me put it another way. In order to, now, mistakes are inevitable in our work, but they can often lead to a better understanding of our patients' needs when we pay attention to their coaching. Following the patient is the rule. Quoting Casement again, quote, by listening too readily to accepted theories and to what they lead the practitioner to expect, it is easy to become deaf to the unexpected. When a therapist thinks that he can see signs of what is familiar to him, he can become blind to what is different and strange, unquote. Now, the plan formulation method is a tool you can use to add to what you already know and not interfere with your seeing the broader field. Being able to see the broader field is one factor which distinguishes social work from other mental health professions, in my experience. When I engaged in research at SFPRG, I made definitive case formulations. In my practice, I never do so, as I first rely on what I already know, keeping an open mind, while aware of the case formulation method's usefulness. In supervising, I always stress the importance of trusting oneself versus relying first on theory to understand what is transpiring in treatment. Casement said that almost all he has learned about psychoanalysis he's learned from his patients, even if different from what he was taught to expect, and that it is only when I trust myself that I can be of greatest help to my patients, unquote. And now I'm going to give a brief description of a patient and see how we can apply these principles. Ellen was a single Asian woman in her early 30s. She stated that she wanted help to determine if a man she was dating would be a good partner for her. An attractive woman, she had ended other long term relationships with men because she felt those men were not emotionally available enough. Though she and her current boyfriend shared many common interests, she felt he was too immature. She questioned if he could change. She also had questions about whether she should look for another job. Ellen's parents were immigrants. She had a younger brother. She recalled being a minority and felt a sense of shame as she experienced looking so different. Her parents often argued, and her mother didn't seem happy. She would complain to Ellen about her father's shortcomings and look to Ellen to side with her, which made Ellen feel uncomfortable. She told Ellen that her father didn't care about her. Mother acted as though she knew what was best for Ellen and babied her until college, predicting catastrophe if not listened to. She described Mother as not compassionate, rigid, and emotionless. Mother was sensitive to how others saw her. Ellen feared being like her mother when she had kids. She also fears revealing herself lest she be seen as not perfect and thus shameful. Because of economic problems, her father took a job in a foreign country for several years, resulting in Ellen feeling abandoned, although he had actually never been emotionally available. She described him as stoic and quiet. Concurrently, her brother was sent back to the homeland to live with a relative for 2 years due to father's urging. Upon his return, Ellen felt responsible to look out for his welfare. As a student, she had excelled and currently held a responsible position in a startup where she constantly felt her performance had to be perfect. She presented with flat affect even when talking of painful subjects. She was mugged en route to therapy early on, but exhibited no emotion. Upon hearing her trauma, I felt the desire to comfort her with a hug, which of course I didn't do, but I noted it. She wanted therapy for several years, but had kept deferring it. She feels needy and being a burden on others. She said she has difficulty trusting and questioned if I were reliable. So now we have several questions about the case. I'd be interested in your questions. Dean?
Yes, so Norman, thank you so much. I have a lot of questions, and in the box, we also have a lot of questions. I want to start with the questions coming in from our viewers today. So, the first question is about the initial part of your presentation. Folks are curious to know what are two favorite things or memories you hold of your time here at SAS, now the Mandel School?
Well, the opportunity to interact with my professors in a very casual way. I think that student faculty lounge allowed me to feel like I was being treated as an equal, and it made me feel very comfortable. And keep in mind, I didn't have to play left-handed to avoid beating them. So another, um, well, the rich opportunities. I mean, to be in the presence of people like Bayard Rustin,
Mm,
that was incredible, and um, and it just helped to my experiences at MSAS really helped to coalesce my feelings about just um, what I thought about what I would do in this world, and the
mhm,
importance of acting and taking action.
mhm. No, that's incredible. I mean, as you're talking, I'm trying to sort of picture what was it like actually seeing these luminaries, folks who've become part of the American landscape in terms of the overall history of America, and being able to sit and listen to them and be inspired by them. We have visiting committee members on the call today. We have a former dean, we have faculty, we have staff, we have prospective students. And here's a question coming in from a first year student. Dr. Sohn, what advice would you give a first year student that might be unsure of what path they should pursue?
I would say, don't worry about it. Let yourself experience, be open to whatever you're experiencing in the school, and that experience will tell you where to go. You cannot predict. I couldn't predict where I was going to go. I had to have this interaction with my environment, with where I was at, and and that's what lights the way.
Mhm.
And to trust that, and to trust yourself that it'll be there.
That's some great advice. We often tell students here that, a career in social work is a lifelong career, and it's going to take you to many twists and turns, and you'll end up being exactly where you need to be at that point in time. It's a journey. It's a journey, not a destination.
Yes.
So on the other end of that, we have a question from a soon-to-be grad. And this person would like to know, Dr. Schoen, what advice would you give to a soon-to-be grad?
Um, the first job you take is not the last job you'll have,
I like that.
and it doesn't have to be the perfect choice. You'll learn from experiences. Just trust yourself as the guide.
Mhm. And what about an example in your career, how you sort of navigated a sense of uncertainty and then ended up in a role where you said, you know what, this is where I need to be at this point in time. Could you think about an example like that, Norman?
Um, well, okay. This requires a little in-depth understanding of my unconscious, right? Um, I didn't actually uh, trust who I was. I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself, and like I said, when I said to Dr. Goroff in that interview, um, that I would be successful, um, and that's MSAS could afford to take a risk on me, and the other schools couldn't. I didn't even know where that came from. It
Mm,
was in the moment, and I just trusted myself. And so, in the different points of my career, I was fortunate that when I did that postmaster's fellowship, that Mount Zion Hospital was across the street from my from Jewish Family Service. The Psychoanalytic Institute was around the corner.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know I was going to be taking up these opportunities.
Mhm.
I actually unconsciously I felt I had to keep that hidden from myself. I had to keep my
Mhm.
ambitions actually hidden from my consciousness.
Mhm.
And 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 when I got back to San Francisco, I entered into my own therapy again, and that helped to open the way so that I could take advantage of the opportunities that were there, but I didn't think that I was capable of, you might say.
Mhm.
And to be at this point in my career, um, I could never have predicted when I was at MSAS. I could never have predicted that. Um, but I was able to take advantage of the things that as they unfolded.
Mhm. Well, not surprising. We have a series of questions coming from students here, and they're really tapping into what you talked about, this sense of being unsure, but also tapping into what we call the imposter syndrome. One student is saying that I have difficulty finding my niche within social work. How did you overcome this feeling of being inadequate or imposter syndrome?
Uh, Let me answer in this way first. The As I've learned in my career, uh, I many patients have come believing that they were imposters. I have never treated an imposter. Imposters don't come for therapy. Why would they? Their lives are successful being an imposter. They don't want to change. But people who come to therapy and believe they're imposters are actually revealing to me
Mhm.
that they feel guilty about being competent and successful. They feel guilty. And so in therapy, that's how I work with them in helping them to understand why they don't feel safe. How did they come to not feel safe being the person that they are, the competent person that they are. Um, so with regard to myself, a lot of work in therapy to deal with
Mhm.
that. Okay, and I was and I continued to work at that. Um, People would say, "Oh, you're still consulting with Dr. Weiss after all these years." I wanted to learn, and I wanted to learn
Mhm.
from the best.
Mhm.
And some people think might think about, "Oh, you were dependent and this and that." No, I learned from the best. I incorporated what he taught me. He trusted me. I didn't work from the plan formulation method. One day I was presenting to him, and usually he would quickly pick up what was going on in the case. And in this particular case, he couldn't figure it out. And he said, "Well, what's your plan formulation for this patient?" And I said, "Joe, I don't work that way."
Mhm.
For him, that was fine.
Mhm.
He trusted me. And that's why he trusted me when he was no longer able to teach, to ask me and my colleague to take over his seminar.
Wow.
You see, and that's what it is. I trusted myself. Um, so that's what I would say about imposters. If you feel that you're an imposter, it's because you have the a belief that it's not okay for you to be so successful.
Wow. 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 That's powerful. And it really sort of struck a chord when you talked about moving away from this term of resistance and sort of blaming clients for being resistant. And that's something that many of us have been taught in social work. But you see this concept very differently. Tell us a little bit about how you interpret what some clients may call resistance.
Okay, so yeah, so um, a patient uh, a patient who felt that well, there's two different ways to handle that. A patient who was blamed as being stubborn.
Mhm.
It came to my office. Actually, I started seeing her with her husband, and um, and her mother had called her stubborn.
Mhm.
Later, I saw her individually, and I said to her, well, there's nothing wrong with being stubborn. The reason your mother said that you were stubborn was it was inconvenient for her for you to have your own opinion.
Wow.
And I said, if if you can't be stubborn, you can't succeed in life. At the
Wow.
same time, if you are only stubborn, you can't succeed in life. And you need to be able to choose when it's in your best interest to be stubborn and when it's not.
Hmm.
Another patient who was forced to comply to his parents would need to be resistant to me.
Hmm.
Now, knowing that, I would think, okay, the patient's being resistant. He's resisting interpretations or whatever. I now I understood this as a necessity for the patient. He was testing to see if I needed him to submit to me.
Hmm.
So again, it's every case is it's case specific, and to know, okay, why is this patient behaving in this particular way at this particular time?
Hmm.
So the same patient had told me in a previous therapy about a therapist who said to him, who complained about the patient criticizing him, and the therapist said to him, "Well, the last time I did this, uh, you criticized me, and now you're criticizing me for not doing something different." Well, the therapist didn't understand the patient was working on something different at the time.
Hmm.
That's the value of the model that I work with, is you can understand what the particular patient is working on at that particular time.
Hmm.
Again, the rule is you follow the patient, not a rule.
Wow. Yeah. And this comes across really clearly in terms of allowing following coaching from patients, coaching
Yes,
from clients, right?
absolutely necessary. Uh,
Hmm.
Absolutely necessary, and to understand what the coaching means. You know,
Hmm.
um, so yeah. Um, so
So,
go ahead.
so there's another question coming in here. It says, you've obviously seen the evolution of the DSM from the DSM to the DSM-5 TR. So how do you see this evolution of diagnoses reflecting broader shifts in how we conceptualize mental health and pathology?
I treat people. I don't treat diagnoses.
Mm. You need to say that again, Dr. Sohn. You treat people, not diagnoses. People
Yeah,
need to hear that.
yeah, yeah. And so people say, "Well, what's your specialty?" I say, "People."
Hmm. Mm.
Yeah. See, if I'm treating a diagnosis, I'm
Mm.
not individualizing the treatment.
Mm.
And I'm following a rule. Oh, in this case, with a bipolar person, you do this, or with this person, you do that. No, I don't. I don't find value. Well, if I do that, I'm not helping my patients.
Mhm. Mhm. So it's interesting, in terms of helping your clients, and you say patients, we say clients, members, we use these terms interchangeably, but you were helping that client to see a strength, something that's sometimes pathologized as stubbornness, as really seeing it as a strength,
Yes, yes,
but realizing when that strength needed to show up, how they needed to be flexible in the use of that strength, right?
yes,
Because I think you're so right. Very often we're quick to label clients and label them on characteristics that have helped them to survive or been protective
yes,
or help to provide a sense of psychological safety.
yes,
And when we come in with that lens, people obviously push back because it's like, you don't know me. You're just labeling me. You're pathologizing me. So I think that's a really, really powerful insight that you shared with us. So this is a question from a former dean who is on the call here today. And she says, I have no questions, but just a comment. This presentation makes me so nostalgic. You mentioned Winnicott. Winnicott's good enough mothering is still one of my favorite ways of thinking about parenting.
indeed.
So another question coming in from our viewers today, what qualities do you believe are essential for an individual to experience a successful social work career? And I think you answered some of this already, but I'd like to add to this and say, what are three approaches you use in terms of fostering a sense of psychological safety with your clients?
There is no one way to make a patient feel safe except understanding the patient.
Mm,
You cannot understand what the patient needs until you have a framework for how did the patient come to um, to exhibit these behaviors. You have to have a framework for it, and there's no standard way of making a person feel safe.
mm,
Now, look, uh, the first thing is listen.
mm,
Listening in itself is very valuable. And
mm,
that's what I tell my graduate students uh, is the power of listening is so important because in most cases, no one else has listened to this patient in this particular way.
mm,
So that's a way of first of all, of how a patient's going to feel safe is they have somebody who cares and listens. Um, Again, it's following the patient, and it's not
mm,
being. And if you're when I start to pontificate with theory or something, the patients will know it, and they'll feel
mm,
distant. That they won't
mm,
feel like I'm talking to them.
mm, mm. Yeah, yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. Be present, be mindful. You come to each client as an individual, not as a textbook approach, right? And really attune and follow the client's lead. So
Now,
again,
let me add to this. When I was at SAS, I would take process notes.
hmm
Uh, when I worked at Jewish Family Service, I would take notes. When I did my postmaster's fellowship at Mount Zion, I took process notes. I have been taking notes on patients, every patient, my whole career.
hmm
And I review those notes before I see each patient.
mm
I'm already with the patient before the patient comes to me.
hmm Yeah. So we have more questions than we have time to answer, and I'm going to try to get just a few more in, Norman. But one participant here is really curious about your relationship with Eric Erickson. And again, these are luminaries in the field of therapy. It says, what do you feel is your biggest takeaway from your relationship with Dr. Erickson?
His humanity.
Mm,
That's it. Here was giant, this giant,
mm.
and he was gracious and humble
Ah,
and interested in you. Um, that's what I can say about him. I can't tell you. I mean, I read his book, I used his book, but it's 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 his humanity. And the same
mm,
with Joe Weiss. It was I was fortunate to have these models that I could identify with,
mm,
and I remember presenting to Joe over the years, and one time he stopped me and he said, Norm, he said, you really love this work, don't you?
mm,
He got me. He got
mhm,
me.
mhm. And Norm, when I met you last year in San Francisco, dare I say that it's also your humanity that touched me and impressed me. And when you said to the professor, "Hey, you can take a chance on me," right? I mean, that's your authenticity, and I think that comes across and is such a powerful light in terms of helping clients feel safe. So we're going to get in one last question before, unfortunately, we have to transition. But one person said, "What helped you most in managing your anxiety and level of confidence as a therapist?"
Well, again, it's actually trusting myself. And
Mm,
that took years. It took years to allow me to recognize that I wasn't an imposter
mm,
and to trust my authenticity. When I work with a patient, work with people, I just I don't know where it's coming from.
mm,
I used to wonder, well, how did a musician come to write that music? How did an artist come to produce that? It's just there. And I just trust that it's there.
mm,
That's it. I've learned to trust
mm,
it's there
mm,
and not to worry about where it's going to come from.
mm. Well, Norm, I just want to thank you so much. It's one thing to hear about social work or to study social work in a text. It's quite another thing to see it lived out with such integrity over nearly 6 decades. You remind us all today why social work matters and why it's so important for one person to touch and change another individual. What some social work theorists have called mind on mind, the ability of one person to help another person create a transformative experience. Now, several folks are tuning in today are seeking CEUs, continuing education credits. Please want to remind you to complete your evaluation form via the link that Data DeFranco will send to you at the close of this program. This would allow you to get your free CEUs. As Norman has showed us, professional growth is a lifelong process of reflection and action. As we end our session today, I want to encourage you to take one lesson from Norman's evolution and apply it to your own practice this week. And I heard so much today in terms of I don't treat diagnoses, I treat patients, I prepare, I treat each person as an individual, the importance of psychological safety, and so many more. So I want to draw your attention to two upcoming impact talks that we are having, celebrating Social Work Month. Later this month, on March 18th, Ms. Jasmine Long, who is the president and CEO of Birthing Beautiful Communities, a double alumna of the Mandel School, MSSA and MNO, will give a powerful talk about her work on infant mortality. And then on March 25th, our own Dr. Richard Lewis Jones, who is a member of our visiting committee and has an illustrious career in terms of social work impact, will be closing us out for Social Work Month. Many thanks to our folks in the Development and Alumni Office to help us kick off Social Work Month. And I want to remind folks of the Day of Giving, which is April 14th. Earlier on, I said March 14th, April 14th. And we look forward to seeing you and communicating with you around upcoming activities here at the Mendel School. So thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day and have a great social work month. Thank you. Dr. Sohn, thank you so much again. What a wonderful presentation to kick us off for our impact talks and to celebrate Social Work Month.
Thank you for the privilege of presenting.